So this is part B of the Khoodeelaar television channel being broadcast on the internet under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions. The Khoodeelaar television channel is broadcast only on the internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial, not on cable platform or any other platforms. And we are broadcasting this part B in the morning of Sunday, the 16th of July 2023. This is the fortnight or the month, let's say July, that we are observing amongst other campaign ethics topics and issues, the anniversary 34 years ago, Mr. Esmoth Ali and Mr. Esmoth Ali's close relation Watir Ali, two Bangladeshis, were attacked in the flat in the Flower and Dean Walk, that is behind the western side of Brick Lane. And their murderers have not been held to account 34 years on. And I took a part in the campaign that ran up to the time when the 40 or so Bangladeshi protesters arrested at the protest demonstration on Saturday, the 15th of July, 1989, when they were eventually acquitted following trials in various magistrates' courts in East London and Central London. I ran the campaign, and I alone ran the campaign, organized the campaign, resourced the campaign, and made the representations. The de facto representations I made for the acquittal to the courts. See, more or less it went on for about 2 years. And this is the anniversary, 34th anniversary. And what happened was that by the time the actual trials finished, there had been a council election in 1990, May 1990 council election, which saw the election historically for the first time of any number of Bangladeshi origin councillors, candidates elected to the local Tower Hamlets Council. Now, the role I played in the definition and the direction of that election will be something that I'll be discussing at another time, because that will be all consuming topic concerning all aspects of the process and bureaucracy of the local council. According to one very keen observer, I changed the direction of that election. That is to say, as I had told then Labour Party leader Neil, the criminal Kinnock, that if he didn't act on the evidence that I had produced about corruption and racism in the Tower Hamlets Labour Party, then based entirely on the corruption and racism of the Tar Hamlets Labour Party, at that time, the Labour Party would not, get control of the Tar Hamlets Council. Control had been lost to the then SDP Lib Dem or Liberals at the 1986 council election. So I told Neil Kinnock to use the word of a timeout reporter or journalist, the fusillade of faxes. In my fusillade of faxes, I told Kinnock that the Labour Party would lose the opportunity to defeat the SDP Lib Dems and the Liberals, and the council would remain in the control of the SDP Liberals. That was not the only loss. The real loss would be to the cause of democracy, the cause of service to the people, etc., etc. And the Kinnock, of course, did not pay heed. And this woman who has just been celebrated by the Conservatives after her passing, Margaret McDonough, the younger sister of Siobhan McDonough, a member of parliament. Somewhere she was involved in the communications, and I think that she obstructed the implementation of the program that I had told Kinnock to carry out in order to represent the community, the people in Tower Hamlets, by a democratized Labour Party, a corruption-free Labour Party, an anti-racist Labour Party. Margaret McDonough was one of the ones. She was not necessarily communicating every time that there was a communication between me and the Labour Party HQ, but she was pivotal in obstructing the process. So she was a crook, and she was a racist crook, and she couldn't give a fuck to the loss of democracy, further loss of democracy, for another 4 years. So I shall be talking about all of that in another series of broadcasts. Back to the demonstration that took place on 15th of July 1989 in support of the demand for the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service to take action against the people who were responsible for the murder of Mr Esmoth Ali and the grievous bodily harm of his relation Mr Watir Ali. I had not called that demonstration or rally that took place initially at the Altab Ali Park. It was somebody else. But they lost control and lost direction. And it turned out that they had no idea as to why they had this demonstration. They couldn't articulate, and they couldn't have the actual focus on the demand afterwards. So it took me 2 years, effectively, of campaigning, legal work, information work, advocacy in the mainstream media. To what extent they carried the information and published them is another matter, but I did put on the record all the key points. And the role played by the licensed law traders that were involved to the extent that the legal aid funding enticed them, allowed them to take part. Licensed law traders in this country, be they barristers or solicitors or soul cheaters, the individual ones practicing, I call them soul cheaters, or the legal executives, paralegals, etc. Essentially, the English legal bureaucracy is corrupt to the core. Now, that is the norm. That is normally corrupt when it comes to the legal rights, entitlements, and needs of the ordinary white section of the population. All right? But when it comes to the legal rights and needs of people from African background or origins, Asian backgrounds and origins, the operation of the legal service, the delivery of the legal service by the licensed law traders, whether barrister or solicitor, goes down completely to less than minus 1% out of 100% of their obligations. As has been observed, now remember this was in the context, I'm talking about the 34-year-old issues about the need for justice to be seen to be done for Mr. Esmoth Ali and Mr. Watir Ali. In between, now that was 1989, just a year or two before the arrival in immigration terms from Bangladesh, a significant number of criminals, under various excuses and pretexts, who have now, they arrived and they started to settle during the first 5 years of the 1990s. These criminals, I call them criminals because they are committing and have been committing crimes in the context of the community. As I have said, I rejected Lincoln's Inn, the opportunity I had to get a barrister's practicing certificate in 1973 because of Lincoln's Inn individual concern, the administration lying. Well, the same reason I didn't take up a job in the civil service, because of the corruption that I found in the interview process, etc., etc. So it's always a battle for establishing the truth and rejecting falsehood. That is what was involved and will remain involved forever. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَاهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ, truth has arrived. وَزَاهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ, and falsehood has perished. إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. truth shall indeed prevail. So every time there is a decision to be made about anything, any issues, the criteria has always been for me and remains whether the decision should be made to accommodate falsehood or reject falsehood, uphold the truth. All the analysis of the police behavior on the day of the demonstration, the 15th of July, 1989, shows that they were not bothered about truth or falsehood. They were not bothered about justice, fairness, and most certainly they were not bothered about coming across as being instruments of racist agenda. And in the last 34 years, the criminals that arrived in Britain from Bangladesh, either directly from Bangladesh or through other countries, some of those criminals have got kind of equivalent de facto certificates as licensed law traders. But not one of them has taken part in one single law-related, law-based action for justice. Okay, so that is the difference between them and me. What I did was to get all the 40 accused acquitted. And I didn't run a licensed law trading office or setup. I did that with my ongoing constitutional law, ethical and procedural law and morality, and so on. Earlier in the last 24 hours, I have been talking about the pieces that appeared in 2014, just before the 2014 Tower Hamlets Council, so-called elected mayor election. And this is a piece written by Ted Jury, Jeory, Ted Jury, on the Daily Express website. It was published in February, I think, Daily Express website. And the main gist of the references refresh the memories about the corrupt role of Lutfur Rahman in conjunction with the crook, the founder and main presenter at that time of Channel S. Now, because there is no description of the letter S, and there is ample evidence based on the contents of the output to justify calling it slaves, I have renamed them as channel slaves. So, Lutfur Rahman gave a certificate to help the channel slaves founder, Mahi Ferdaus. Now, the spelling is very weird. It is not a spelling that is in the nomenclature, the name system of Bangladeshis. That kind of spelling is not there. It has been said, but it has not been verified by any published kind of sourced materials, that name, that part of the name that Jalil, which is his core name, uses is actually a name that he stole from somebody else. Now he's a convicted thief. He was jailed twice and he has not overturned either of the convictions or the sentencing. So this is the man that has been complicit with the corruption of Taramras Council by Lutfur Rahman et al. So these are the people that have not been even mentioning the need for justice for Mr. Esmoth Ali, Mr. Watir Ali, or Mr. Ishaq Ali, or Mr. Tosir Ali. And they most certainly have not been talking about the Bangladeshi teenage schoolboy Ajmal Ahmad, who was at a pupil of the Langdon Park School in Poplar. The Langdon Park schoolboy Ajmal Ahmad was murdered by stabbing carried out by a gang of Bangladeshi youngsters. So I went to the Taramras Council seeking information, evidence of any role that the Taramras Council, being the local council, was playing to address the issue of Bangladeshi young people murdering other Bangladeshi young people. And in post at the time, in the hocus pocus bogus mayoral cabinet, fronted by Lutfur Rahman the liar, was a councillor called Ohid Ahmad, Ohid, Ohid Ahmad. Now, as I said in the previous edition, when Ohid Ahmad saw me, it was physically impossible for him to disappear. He would have to commit a self harm if he attempted to run out of the room or office in a rush to avoid having to answer my questions. What it boils down to is that I had no duty to go there. I still don't have any duty to do any of the campaigns that I am doing on behalf of the people who deserve justice, who deserve their attackers, violators to be brought to account. But I have to do that because there is nobody else doing it. It's not a omission measured by days. It's a deliberate, intentional, criminally perpetrated negligence and contempt to the community by those who got elected with the votes of the community. And there are literally literally hundreds and hundreds of propaganda items put out via these channel slaves, suggesting to the ordinary viewers within the community that those featured in those promotions were doing something positive for the collective benefit of the community in the context of justice, in the context of fighting racism, and so on. But that kind of impression would be wrong, not factually true. For 34 years, the murderer or murderers of Mr Esmoth Ali, Mr Watir Ali, Mr Ishaq Ali, Mr Tosir Ali, I'll go back to Tosir Ali and Ishaq Ali more than 34 years because Tosir Ali was murdered more than 50 years ago. And Ishaq Ali was murdered in July 1978, which was 11 years before Mr. Esmoth Ali was murdered in July 1989. But whatever the actual date and whatever the duration, the passage of time since those murders and crimes, the subsequently established business operations called the Channel S or similar outlets doing business in the name of the Bangladeshis in the United Kingdom, but focusing on the main demographic concentration based in Tower Hamlets. There is absolutely no recognition of any duty to even topically mention these events and the overdue, outstanding need for justice for these people by these outlets. So, when in the Guardian, misedited by this woman called Catherine Vanity Vine, who has recently got married to the highly, highly offensive opportunist called Adrian Childs. It carried a piece yesterday, in the last 48 hours, let's say, about Drummond Street in Camden, in the Euston area. And the Drummond Street is affected by the construction work under the HS2 project. Now, anyone who looks at the Khoodeelaar campaign Twitter account, you'll see that our main declaration, our profile description has been saying that we are campaigning against HS2 as well. It's a very short number of words that can be published. And HS2 is one of the ones that we have been able to include in our profile. So to us, opposition to HS2 is part of the existence of our campaign. All of these campaigns put together make up, constitute the movement defending the community in the East End of London and defending the values from the East End of London that affect other people. So the Guardian refers to the Drummond Street Asian restaurants. It doesn't call them Indian, it doesn't call them Bangladeshi, it doesn't call them Pakistani, but they're restaurants that are effectively known, identifiable as what is generally referred to wrongly as Indian or restaurants. So that piece was there, and it quoted people that are managing the businesses and are expressing concern about the adverse impact on their business of the HS2 disruptions. And as a wrongly included contrast to Brick Lane, the typically idiotic Guardian referred to the Brick Lane restaurants as being Bengalis. Now, the big Brick Lane restaurants are not Bengalis, they're Bangladeshis. Because in 1973, less than 2 years after the 16th of December 1971, when as a state Bangladesh was recognized by India to begin with and by others, the state of Bangladesh coming into existence meant that anyone coming from Bangladesh or carrying the Bangladesh nationality is a Bangladeshi, not a Bengali. So when the Sunday Times ran a piece in 1973, byline to this racist anti-Muslim criminal called Leslie Garner, she distinguished Brick Lane and the East End as being populated by Silotis, non-Bengalis. And she referred to Bengalis as being different from Silotis. And she mentioned a number of Bengalis. She didn't actually give the actual identifiable names, but she described them adequately enough for them to be identified as Bengalis, making the biggest false statement that is on the record about the Bangladeshis internationally, to the effect that the Bangladesh liberation war efforts in 1971 were not supported by the Brick Lane people, the Bangladeshi, the Silotis living in East End of London, and that they had to come and raise the awareness of the Silotis to join the campaign and support Bangladesh. So it was made very clear right from the beginning, more than 50 years ago, that the people in East London, the Bangladeshis, are not Bengalis. And there are literally thousands of other examples. Two of those examples include the now deceased Bengali prostitute journalist called Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury, and his exact opposite, the Jamaat Islami fundamentalist and convicted of war crimes, so called, Delwar Hussain Saidi. These two could not be contrasted more extensively, and both of those are on the record as expressing severe, offensive condemnations, denials of the Silotis. So the Silotis never belonged, and never can belong, and never should belong, never need to belong to some other identity. Silotes are, have been, and shall remain Silotes, especially since the saint Shah Jalal arrived with his followers and they spread through truthfulness, non violently, the message of truth. The Siloti language now, the vocabulary that has been there for the last 700 plus years, the vocabulary contains a rich collection of words from the Pushtu, Farsi, Arabic, Turkish, Kurdish languages and backgrounds. And the reason is that the Saint Shah Jalal had with him these saints and followers coming from Kurdistan, Persia, Yemen, and other parts of Arabia and Turkey and Iran, say. And these were people who impressed the local people, their hosts, by the sheer quality of their character, and they epitomized the appearance in reality of the arrival of the truth and the disappearance, the perishing of falsehood. Yes? وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. So the acceptance of the message emphasized in their daily behavior and conduct was very consistent and the people accepted them. So Sylhet was revolutionized and a wholly new phenomenal change was brought into being, covering the greater parts of Sylhet. Sylhet is not just in Bangladesh but in the Indian states as well. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. They came with this message. So anyone who says that they were among the councillors of Bangladeshi background that got into the Terrorist Council at the 1990 election, as soon as they said that, they are obliged to answer the question, okay, you did get into the council as elected councillors, but what purpose did you serve? What did you do? Did you take up the case of anyone? Not naming any names, but did you take up any case that warranted support, rigorous support in the context of racism discrimination, and so on. And the evidence that I have in front of me, over the years, I have collected the information. Let's say this is now talking about 34 years from 1989, but if we say 32 years, let's say, after the 1990 election, let's say we give them a couple of years to settle down. So those who got elected by citing their loyalty to the Bangladeshi voters at election time had no option but to explain what service did they perform, what service did they support. Nothing to do with giving grants, most certainly not. But in terms of transforming the standard of accountability by the local Armorers Council on issues that affected people, what did they do? And I don't believe that any single councillor from that particular year, 1990, May 1990 election, did any of those things. Now that was 1990. And ever since the 1990 election, every regular election, council election, has seen significant numbers of Bangladeshi based or Bangladeshi origin or Bangladeshi descended candidates for election to the council. So, 6, 7, 8 elections, let's say 7. 7 council elections. What did they do after the elections each time? I don't think that they have done it. Now, I'm making this open assertion. If any of the councillors elected in 1990, 1994, 1998, 2002, 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018, 2022, any of the councillors elected at any of those elections, inter-hamlets, if they have done anything to address the issues of racism in the prosecution, racism in the policing, racism in the allocations of various services by the local council, then of course they must be able to produce the evidence by reference to the decision. Where was the decision made? If there was a decision made, was it made in a memo, one councillor to an employee of the council, in a letter, a councillor to whatever, a member of staff or the chief executive, whatever, or since the introduction, foisting of the corrupt post of the elected mayor, starting with October 2010. Any communication to the incumbent as the incumbent in the post of mayor, surely they can produce it. And I'm saying that they cannot produce it. Why? Because they haven't done it. This is my area, this is my field. I know all these councillors, not necessarily as family members or as kind of visitors to their homes or whatever. I know In the context of the behavior, within the framework of the elected council, its structure, I know them, and they haven't done it. The only campaign, the only questions that have been raised in this regard have come from me and are coming from me. So I have been addressing individual cases, I have been addressing collective cases. So, for example, when the very significant decision was being made by Tar Hamlets as a local council to stage a sneaky operation and destroy the single sex composition of the Mulberry School for Girls. Who stood up to oppose it? Any councillor? Well, in the 1980s, there was no councillor. I mean, the only one that was there, the Siloti one was Abbas Uddin Ali Salal, and the Bengali one was Nurul Haq. Neither of them stood up. Neither of them would stand up. So in 1987, I did the campaign to stop the Labour controlled Labour group, but the Lib Dem controlled council from sneakily converting the Mulberry School into a mixed sex school. And I stopped it. How did I stop it? I stopped it by doing the footwork. I went on the street and knocked on the doors and I collected signatures, the requisite number of petition signatures, collected and then submitted to the proper, duly bureaucratic channel, which was the Secretary of State in the name with the brief of education. And the Secretary of State rejected the plot to convert the Mulberry School into mixed sex school. That was done by me. The result was that decades later, yes, that was in the 80s. So the next decade was 90s, and the next decade was the 2000. So by the time Barack Obama entered his second term, his wife Michelle Obama wanted to stage her own Solidarity Act for women and girls. And when she visited the United Kingdom, she needed an example of a good, on the record, the bureaucratic record, on the records that the published data showed. She needed to be able to visit a school that was doing well for the girls. And it was the Mulberry School. The other one, of course, was a school in Camden, but this was the one that I am concerned about. Now, had I not done what I did in 1987, Michelle Obama would not be visiting Tar Hamlets, would she? Now, how far is that? It is not just the physical distance, intellectually, emotionally, and in terms of the morality and the credibility. In all other ways, Tower Hamlets is not only deprived, but the Tower Hamlets' reputation as a council is depraved, deprived and depraved. And all the Bangladeshi leaders, the sneaky criminals that are so jealous of me that they go and spread words to discredit my work. Well, they can't discredit my work because I am not. I am not discreditable because everything I do is for the moral case, the actual physical evidence based case. So that's what I'm doing. So I prevented Tower Hamlets Council and the Inner London Education Authority from colluding to destroy the single sex status of Tower Hamlets Girls' School, Marlbury School. And the school stands and it is doing, in the general scheme of things, far better than all the other schools in the borough and in the country in a big way. And this is something, the only thing about Tower Hamlets that can be mentioned with pride by those very criminals who are forever obstructing me is that example of my work. Similarly, the one particular event that took place on the 22nd of May 1986 was the rally that I organized outside the BBC's headquarters at that time in, wait for it, in a place called White City. And that was a rally organized by me to protest against the 4-part series shown on the BBC Two, on Thursdays. And the 22nd of May 1986 was the last Thursday of this showing on BBC Two of a thing called the King of the Ghetto. It was a completely anti-Siloti, anti-Bangladeshi, anti-Muslim confection based on the assumption of making a racist criminal come across as the savior of the Silotis, the Bengalis, the Bangladeshis, and the Muslims of Brick Lane area. So I had to organize the rally. Now, those who did attend the rally, apart from me, of course, were there out of shame, because if they didn't go there, then they would be identifiable. But the initiative was mine, and the rally should have lasted for longer than it did last. What happened? These children of empire, the mental slaves and ethnic surrogates, could not rush out of the rally fast enough. So if they left, it would be back to the same mode, the same number. I would be the only one still chanting demands and condemnation at the BBC, just as I did outside the Wells Street Magistrates Court and the Horseferry Road Magistrates Court during those months of protest against the arrest and the prosecution of the protesters that were arrested in the Bethnal Green Road on the 15th of July 1989. So the evidence is that for 51, 52 years since I landed here, I have been having to do the campaigns. And the criminals that carry the little kind of post and little description go outside of the hearing distance and they spread words that they hope would discredit me. Now, there is nothing to discredit me. It's not an empty boast. I am the great grandson of the Saint Vedh Shah. And my grandmother, my father's mother, who was his son's wife, my grandmother, Musammat Tayyabun Nessa, told me when I was very young about the saint. And she said to me that you are like your great grandfather. Of course, I didn't see him. I didn't even see her husband, that is my father's father, because I was born after he died. So she said that you are like him. Now, of course, she didn't go into every single item, but essentially, what I found was that she was summarizing to me a message that I should continue the work, Vedh Shah's work. And I am doing this, I have been doing this. Every time I have confronted any courier of evil anywhere, I have found that the evil has disappeared. Either as a message, as a statement, as a proposal, or similar. As I said, this bears saying as many times as I can say it, factually, contextually. I mean, two examples. One is the Indian Prime Minister in 1977, who was Morarji Desai, and the UK's Prime Minister at the same time, the criminal racist James Callaghan. I pronounce it in that way deliberately in order to get the pronunciation fixed on the Callaghan bit. And of course, in the 60s, a decade before that, I had the confrontation or the debate, put it however you like, with the man who later became president and also prime minister of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. As I have said, I didn't arrive at the Institute of Engineers, which is in the middle of the main part of the university area, the main capital administration area, High Court, etc., etc. So, Institute of Engineers. which was the venue for the event that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Benazir Bhutto's father, but Benazir was hardly there. I mean, she was a child in 1960s. So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had arrived in Dhaka following his ouster as the cabinet minister in the regime of the military administration fronted by Field Marshal Ayub Khan. Now, Field Marshal Ayub Khan was, of course, a commissioned officer during the British in the 1930s, 40s. So, Ayub Khan had employed or recruited or headhunted, let's say, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto when Bhutto was a short term lecturer at the University of Southampton in England, a law lecturer. Now, when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto criticized, I think, some of the policies that Ayub Khan was following, Ayub Khan then kicked him out. And so confident was Z. Bhutto about his political prospects and political expertise or charm and attractiveness to the masses that he immediately concluded that he would be the person to defeat the most populous at that time, most popular political party in the eastern wing, that is East Pakistan at the time, which is now Bangladesh, which was the Awami League as fronted by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So Bhutto came to the Institute of Engineers, which would be like about 5 minutes, if that, a drive from the then Intercontinental Hotel in Dhaka, and similar distance from the main faculty building of the arts building of the University of Dhaka. So he arrived with the confidence that he would address the cream of political young people in then East Pakistan, and he would so impress them with his abilities, his talents, and his charisma, and whatever else he thought he had. So much so that the audience that he was going to address at the Institute of Engineers would become radically transformed into the East Pakistan branch of the movement that he, Bhutto, was going to launch to sink the Awami League and to also challenge Ayub Khan. Now, I didn't belong to any party. I still don't belong to any political party in what is now Bangladesh and what was East Pakistan or Pakistan at the time. And the reason I don't belong to any of the parties is not because I have no interest in the political life of the country or the community. but because, in my observation, the political parties have members who have a record, of being corrupt, short sighted, ignorant, and stupid. That's the reason I never could join any of the parties. So the next best thing is for me to remain an observer. So I have been on the records a published observer for more than 60 years, starting in the early 1960s. In the early 1960s, I started with the Bengali language one, which is the Jugoveri based in Silot, and the same house published the English language corresponding the Bengali language one, Eastern Herald. Both titles owned by the Rashid family. Aminur Rashid Chowdhury was the main editor. They came from a family in the Shanamganj area that had acquired wealth by questionable means, but they got hold of these titles from the Hindus who left in 1947, who left and went into India. So, when I arrived at the Institute of Engineers, I did that in the simplest possible, with the simplest possible outlook, that I would see what Zedeh Bhutto had to say. And then I would go, and if I thought he said anything significant, then I'd write it and it would be published. That was the calculation. I had not consulted with anyone, and I had not expected anyone to consult with me. So when the proceedings began, it began in front of a few, well, it was a packed Institute of Engineers. And my understanding is that the people that attended, mostly men, and the main age would be under 30. So I didn't know anyone, as I said, I didn't consult anyone going there. So when Bhutto finished his introduction, I would say he spoke for a few minutes. I waited a reasonable time for somebody to follow up and ask him the question or questions. Nobody did. That meant that I thought I would ask him the question. And as I have said before, I asked Bhutto 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 questions in a row. And every time he answered, he came up short. He didn't answer, he couldn't answer whatever it was that I was focusing on in the previous question. So after my ninth question, instead of saying anything, Bhutto must have concluded that's it. He must run. So he ran. Bhutto left the gathering, and that was the last time that Bhutto came to East Pakistan addressing any political gathering whatsoever. And the Awami League was allowed to live. Because if Bhutto's fantasy had got anywhere near reality, then the Awami League High Command would indeed be unsettled. So Bhutto left the gathering and he left eastern Pakistan very soon after. There was nothing in the contents of the coverage that suggested that Bhutto had even visited East Pakistan at the time. So Bhutto became marginalized and abolished himself. That act of reducing himself to irrelevance, as far as East Pakistan was concerned, was the biggest event that happened before the events of December 1970. When the election took place, the election was originally scheduled to happen in September 1970, but because of the cyclone, it was delayed by 3 months and it took place in December 1970. And the number of people elected, including the fact that there were many of the polling booths and polling stations were hijacked by the Awami League thugs. Even so, they still had the numerical majority, overwhelming number of seats they got. So much so that in counterpart in West Pakistan, Bhutto had the largest number of seats. So what did he do? Bhutto immediately made a statement saying that any member of his party that had got elected as an MP at that election would be severely punished if they went to East Pakistan to attend the National Assembly, which should assemble and be held in East Pakistan because the demography was in favor of East Pakistan because there are more people, more voters, and more MPs from East Pakistan than from West Pakistan as a whole. So Bhutto threatened the MPs from his party, including the threat that if they went there, they would beat them up. So nobody went there, and the crisis was begun because Bhutto didn't want Sheikh Mujib to logically benefit from the election result because the numbers of MPs that Sheikh Mujib's party had were far higher than the numbers that Bhutto had, or the numbers that all the others combined had. So it was Sheikh Mujib's democratic right to form the government, and Bhutto would not have it. Now, to what extent my encounter with Bhutto and my challenge had outraged Bhutto and determined him to carry this determination against East Pakistan, I cannot say because I never communicated with him. But my understanding would be that he must have formed a very serious opinion against the superiority of East Pakistan politically. And he must have associated me with the kind of threat to his superiority sense of complex. The debate that took place between him and Sheikh Mujib in the period of the negotiations of the round table meetings, of course, took place without me attending. So I don't know what actual words they were using. If I had any contribution, going by what I did in the Institute of Engineers, I think I would have been able to tackle Bhutto in a way that he was not tackled by Sheikh Mujib or any of the others. That is one part that I did not have any role in. What would happen? It is uncertain as to what would happen, but I would find it very difficult to resist the temptation that Bhutto would give me. Because I found Bhutto to be shallow, not very well briefed on the facts, and he was liable to be distracted very easily. And as I have said in the past, his announcements at the United Nations General Assembly were absolutely foolish. And other things that I've explained, not going to repeat now, were consistent with the view that Bhutto was shallow, overrated, and was not fit for purpose for Pakistan in any role as either Prime Minister or President. None of these things would have been made public. The insight that I have about Bhutto is the insight that I have. I didn't discuss with anyone what happened there after the event. But Bhutto learned the lesson and he just packed his bag and went back to West Pakistan. And then he made the stupidest possible decisions, banning the MPs from going to East Pakistan was completely, absolutely anti democratic. Now, whatever Sheikh Mujib's political ambitions were, would have been easily defeated had Bhutto not prevented these people from West Pakistan from going to East Pakistan. Because, as I've said, the observation that I made over 3 years a short briefing at his house, 32 Dhanmondi. Sheikh Mujib was not well advised by people that were around him. And the biggest mistake that Sheikh Mujib made about getting a Pakistan wide platform was his ingratitude to Maulana Bashani and his ingratitude to other people that were fundamentally the stalwarts of democracy, not just in the context of Muslims, but the democracy movement that they led against the British during the 30 years before August 1947. So, what is happening in Bangladesh, what is happening in Pakistan, what is happening in India, contextually related to the events of August 1947, is happening mainly because of the dishonesty on the part of those who became able to grab the posts and positions, and the absence from the main platforms of the real leaders of the movement for independence from the British. Both India and Pakistan, as well as since the 16th of December 1971, Bangladesh. The ingratitude shown to Sher-e Bangla, Fazlul Haq and Maulana Bashani was unacceptable, and it did have the impact. Because although numerically the Awami League achieved majority numbers of votes, intellectually, politically, and morally, the Awami League never became the party that people loved. It is a bureaucracy that is beloved of thugs and criminals. And the fact that despite that it is in power is a evidence of the absence of alternative, political, morally fit alternatives in the country. More or less the same thing happens with slight modifications and changes in what is now Pakistan. And I see that Imran Khan is embattled, but Imran Khan also suffers from ignorance and a narrow mindedness that would not benefit democracy movement in the country. And that needs to change. As far as India is concerned, the only political opposition to the fascists, Amit Shah and Narendra Modi, is of course the West Bengal Chief Minister, Mamata Banerjee. With more than 1 billion people in the country, there should be more, many more than just one Mamata Banerjee. And yet there are none. And the whole of the judiciary in the country, the Republic of India, is completely unfit for purpose. It's a logjam. Thousands of court cases are completely stranded, trapped in a timeless stagnation. And Modi and Shah have weaponized discrimination, corruption, massacre, rape, and so on a scale that is going to cost India very dearly. We've got so many other items that we could actually talk about. For example, the issue of the BBC, the issue of the groping of this woman, Daisy Goodwin, and the issue of the political murderer of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, and the issue of the latest corruption affecting the various local councils, including Tower Hamlets, Newham, Hackney, Lewisham, and of course Croydon. We shall be having to wait until other later editions to cover those and get up to date commentary and narratives about those. Now, this is 1 hour. Is it 1 hour and 26 minutes at 8:20 hours GMT? So we shall come to an end to this edition, and we shall be continuing in the later editions.